Kira, do you remember in middle school when you came up as Jigsaw?
Yeah. You wanna play a game? That was so good.
I remember our teacher or principal thinking you were part of like the Juggalos.
Just a cute little cult moment.
So, speaking of Jigsaw, I'm not really well experienced in the world of Saw. Could you like explain what it is?
I saw basically this franchise that started with I think his name is James Wan. Anyways, and it's about 2 bros chilling in a bathroom 5 feet apart because 'cause they're not gay, and they're both hooked up with chains on their ankles, and it's all about trying to deduce how to get out of this room.
They have keys, right?
The little trick behind it is they did have keys, but when the dude woke up, it got flushed down, like, the bathroom, so did they have keys? Kinda.
So, the reason I bring up Saw, Jigsaw, all of that is because today we're going to be talking about someone who kind of lived in a real life Saw trap. There was this pizza delivery man. His name was Brian Wells. He was given instructions to do a few crimes, and at the end of each of these crimes, he would be given keys, or he would be able to find these keys that would unlock pieces of a collar he had around his neck. He only had 15 minutes because around this collar he had a bomb and it was going to go off. Brian was able to rob a bank. That was his very first task to do. But he was then face to face with the police and death. He began to beg and plead the police to help him, to free him. He told them that the bomb wasn't real, it was a decoy, and even told them that he was forced to do this, that he was held hostage by 3 black men who were watching his every movement and he didn't know what to do, but the bomb was not going to go off. It was a decoy. The police obviously couldn't take any risks, so they had to wait for the bomb squad. But 3 minutes before the bomb squad even arrived, the bomb would go off, killing Brian instantly. See, at this time, this was in 2003, 2 years after 9/11. So a lot of Americans were very, very scared of terrorist attacks, bombs. I mean, who's not scared of a bomb? But they were more on edge about it. And the thing is, the police were confused because Brian said it was a decoy. So they ended up searching his car and they actually found instructions to the scavenger hunt. And they would actually do this route themselves. And when they would go to each of the location, they realized that Brian was doomed. He would have never been able to do this. The bomb would have went off anyways. But why? Why was he doing this? Did he really think it was a decoy? Was he set up? Was he planning on killing the police? Or was he really just left in the dark? And today we're going to dive into what happened and the case of the pizza bombing situation, or also known as the murder of Brian Wells. Hi, welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm Jen. With me is Kira. In this podcast, we talk about all sorts of things that we find interesting or disturbing. And today we're going to be talking about Brian Wells, who was a pizza man who was strapped to a bomb and forced to rob a bank. I'll give a little bit of some trigger warnings. We will be mentioning, obviously, murder. There'll be mentions of drugs, sex work, abuse, stuff like that. So if any of that is maybe you don't want to hear it, feel free to watch another episode or maybe go and relax. So, disclaimer, all of the information we find is just online. We just kind of gather it all together. And so, if anything we say is wrong, feel free to let us know. And we mean no harm to anyone who was affected by this case. And if you want to correct us on this or you want to join in the conversation, feel free to in the comments down below. We speak for no one but ourselves, and if you also have a case you would like us to talk about, we do have a Google form in our description, or you can just leave in the comments. But with that, I think we can begin. So, Brian was born and raised in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was one out of 6 children, and he didn't graduate high school actually. He dropped out when he was 16 in 1973, and he went to work as a mechanic, and then he eventually worked at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria until he died. He was there for about 10 years. So, The thing about Brian was he was noted to be childlike and shy. He was more interested in animals than people, which I mean, me too. But he did have a really good relationship with his mom. She was a widow, so he stayed in contact with her. He didn't really have a lot of friends. He was single, but he did engage with a lot of sex workers. He was friends with a few of them as much as he can be friends with someone who he is paying for. So I don't know if they were very close or not, but he had a history of some violence. And he also had a history of drugs, but I don't think he did anything too hardcore. I mean, drugs, I'm not too sure what he did, but with one of the sex workers that he saw a lot, the one that he was pretty close to, her name was Jessica Hoopsick, and he actually would pay her drugs to have sex. And he would actually use this man named Ken Barnes as kind of like his drug dealer. He was also a crack dealer in town. He also ran this little low rate brothel that Jessica was at. So that's how they kind of knew each other. He would give Brian drugs to give to Jessica to as a form of payment. And it was stated that Jessica was pregnant. This is one of the things that's very interesting. But no one knows if the child was even Brian's or if Brian even knew. But the one thing was Brian needed to pay Ken back for all the drugs he had been, taking. And this would kind of come up later in this case. So on August 28th, 2003, the pizzeria would receive a call for Brian to deliver two pizzas to 8631 Peach Street. It was only a few miles from the pizzeria and it was actually located near a dirt road. Now, this call wasn't actually a surprise to Brian. He actually had previously known this was going to happen because Ken was in on this plan and he needed someone to rob a bank. And Jessica had given Brian's name to Ken since, he needed to pay Ken back. So Brian was the perfect person for this. So this entire plan was masterminded by Marjorie Deal Armstrong, who she believed her father was spending her inheritance. So she thought the best thing to do would be, I guess, kill her dad. So she went to go hire Ken, but he had a rate of $250,000. So she decided that the best idea to do this would be to rob a bank, but she wasn't going to do it herself. So this is where Brian had come up. And apparently, Jessica confesses in a Netflix documentary called Evil Genius that she set Brian up by giving Ken Brian's name and his delivery schedule in exchange for drugs and money. She claimed that Brian knew and was a willing participant in this entire thing. But it's kind of unsure if Brian really was. The FBI lead agents kind of believed that Jessica was just lying and that she just was bullshitting, I guess, and that Brian didn't actually know it was a real bomb. Brian's been a huge controversy in this case because a lot of investigators believe he was a willing participant in the robbery, but that he was told the bomb was fake. And Brian's family, they actually believe Brian was just forced into this robbery. But before we kind of go into this, let's kind of talk a little bit about the perpetrators and who they are and how we got to this place. So, the mastermind behind this entire thing is Marjorie. So, she was actually a musical prodigy and she was doing really well. She got her master's at Gannon College. Gannon, fuck, I think of
Names of the things in this case are so weird. Like Peachtree,
I
Gan
know. Yeah, the names are definitely a little they feel randomized. So she got her master's at the Gannon College and unfortunately she suffered majorly from bipolar disorder and a lot of other mental health issues, which began to take over her life in the 20s. Now, Marjorie had a habit of dating men and them vanishing or dying without people understanding why. Very suspicious. Some actually thought she might be a serial killer because she just had so many exes die around her. I mean, you have one guy die and you're dating like awful. Two, you're like, oh man, your luck is terrible. Three, you're like, damn, like this is shitty. By the fourth one, you people are gonna probably think, okay, are you doing something to these people? Because it's very suspicious. And so in 1984, she actually had a boyfriend named Robert. He was shot by her 6 times with a shotgun while he slept on a couch. And she was actually acquitted of this because she argued that she was being abused by Robert. I don't really know. Maybe she was. I'm not going to argue that. But her other husband she had, his name was Richard. He died in 1992 from a brain hemorrhage. And she actually had an ex die from suicide. So a lot of these men would just die. So another guy she actually dated was named William Rothstein. They both dated in the 60s and the 70s, and he was a handyman and a shop teacher, and he was also considered so smart that he struggled to connect with people. And this guy was very interesting because he hit another guy named Floyd Stockton, who was another accomplice in this entire thing, but he was hiding in William's house so he wouldn't be convicted for raping a disabled teenager, which is just what? So Marjorie, William, and Ken, they all had this want to get rich quick scheme. So they began to brainstorm some ideas at Ken's home. So that's when Marjorie's like, "Oh, I think a really good idea would be to kill my father because he's spending all my inheritance money." And so Ken was like, "I will do that if you pay me $250,000." So Marjorie was like, "I think if we do a series of heists around town, that would secure these funds and then she can pay people back when she gets some of that inheritance." And so William began to construct this collar bomb that was going to be a decoy, but it was going to look real, but it was going to be a decoy. So Brian comes into the picture because it seemed like Brian needed to pay some people back. Brian was told that he'd get some money out of this. He thinks it's fake. He's going to make some money and pay back what he needs to do for Ken. And so he's going to do it. So they actually had him come in before and do a rehearsal. Like they rehearsed it. They put the collar on him. It wasn't a real bomb. So they had convinced Brian that it was a fake collar. And then they decided that it'd be better if they just went with a real one instead of a fake one, even though Brian was told it was fake. So the collar bomb worked like handcuffs around the neck with four keyholes that would go under the chin and a rectangle housing containing two pipe bombs, two kitchen timers, one electric timer that hung from his chest, a device that had several decoys such as an unconnected wire, a toy cell phone, and a bunch of warning stickers. So, according to the law enforcement, Brian had actually found out the plot had changed and learned that the bomb was real. And Brian's family, they really don't believe this. They believe that Brian went there not knowing what happened. And when he delivered the pizzas, he was basically held at gunpoint by these strangers and was forced to participate. So no one really knows exactly what really happened, if Brian went there willingly or if he didn't. But there is some evidence to show that there was a struggle and a fight between them all and to get this bomb on Brian. And so, according to Floyd, he said that he was the one who put the bomb on Brian and that Ken had sent off a pistol in order to keep Brian to comply. Brian was then given a really shitty handmade shotgun to be used to look like a cane. He was ordered to say that three black men had forced this bomb on him and were holding him hostage. So then he was given some instructions, a little scavenger hunt, where he would go on a crime spree, and after each crime, he would find a key to deactivate pieces of this bomb until the bomb would fully neutralize and it'd be done at the end of the spree, and he could take some money and head on home. But he was also told that he'd be under surveillance and that if he made any attempts to call the police, the bomb would detonate. At the bottom of these instructions were the words, "Act now, think later, or you will die." So he was basically told that they were going to be watching him the entire time, so he cannot try to let anyone know what's going on, and he only had 15 minutes to do this. So at 2:30 p.m., Brian arrives at the Summertown Center PNC Bank and he slips a note to the bank teller demanding for 250,000 from the vault, that the warning bomb would detonate in 15 minutes and they needed to do this now, and that he had a shotgun. He was also noted to be like sucking on a sucker and acting really confident, which I think is very interesting. I don't know why he had a sucker, but anyways, he told them, "If you guys don't do this, I have a shotgun and I will make you guys do this." And obviously, I'm sure, I mean, I never worked in a bank, but I'm pretty sure a lot of places, especially banks, you kinda have to comply. I don't know if that's true. Is that right, Kira?
It is true. As soon as someone is like, "Hey, give me the money," in the cases where I've been robbed, because I used to work at a bank, like, even if they come in and, like, pass you just a note, you have to give over money, or I've had it where a person put down, like, a bullet on the counter. Also, fake gun, just had to give them the money. There's lots of insurances and stuff for banks, so it's not really that big of a deal, but the cops will get there.
Damn, that's actually so scary thinking about it. So this teller was able to only get around 8,700 within 8 minutes. So Brian decides to leave with that money and he's going to go to the next location. Once Brian had actually left, witnesses had already called 911 and right before he got to the second crime, he was at his car and the police had found him and they arrested him and they handcuffed him and then they had him sitting in a parking lot away from them so in case this bomb went off, they wouldn't be killed. Obviously, police have to wait for the bomb squad. They can't just be messing around. And Ryan kept telling them that three black men had placed the bomb on him, that he had to do this because he was being watched. He told the police that he had no choice or he would be killed by them. And the police just didn't do anything to disarm this device, even though Brian was sitting there begging them to take it off, and they couldn't do anything about it. They had to wait for the bomb squad and focus on clearing out the immediate area because they didn't know what this bomb would do, so they're freaking out. They had to make sure Brian wasn't also going to detonate this bomb himself because maybe he's a suicide bomber or maybe he was trying to lure the police so he could create so many casualties. You never know. So they had to kind of clear out the area. The bomb squad is on the way, but there was a lot of traffic and they weren't able to get there as fast as they wanted. I'm sure it was probably from people trying to get out of there. And so, roughly around 3:04 p.m., they had been called, and it was like 30 minutes after the 911 call, and they were 3 minutes away before the bomb would go off. And actually, this was all recorded live on ABC News. And 3 minutes before the bomb squad showed up, the bomb would go off, blasting a fist sized hole in Brian's chest, killing him in seconds. Now, even though this was recorded, they didn't show the bomb. They decided to cut it immediately. I don't know how they did it so fast, but they just kind of said, "Oh, it's technical difficulties." I'm assuming that they didn't want to start scaring people. There is footage out there, but it has never been shared, but it apparently was leaked to Elliot Siegel, who was a radio host, and he actually posted this on his website a month later, and then he removed it, but now it's been on shock sites. So it's on the internet somewhere. I mean, I didn't go looking for it, so I don't know. But it's honestly so crazy that this happened. And so a lot of people don't know to this day if Brian died knowing this was going to happen or if he was left in the dark because I mean, why would someone kind of do that? So some of the theories are that Brian potentially was like had cognitive delays because why would someone willingly do this? Other theories are he had no choice and he was held at gunpoint, which I feel like is the most makes the most sense because I just can't see anyone just willingly being like, "Okay, I'll do this for whatever." But I mean, maybe the drug dealer was really on his ass and he's afraid. So the police ended up collecting the rest of the props. When they ended up getting the instructions and kind of doing their thing, they realized that Brian was told that he had more time every time he would receive the key. But even then, the police realized that Brian was doomed. He would have died anyways, even if he would have been able to get away from the police, he would have died anyways. After they went to his house to see if there was a list of people, because they thought, maybe there might be something in the house that would give it off and some information. Maybe there was another bomb. They didn't know. But they found nothing except for a list of people, and two of them that he knew were sex workers, which was one of them was Jessica, who had become Brian's friend as much as, I mean, she could. So, only a few days later, Robert Paniti, I don't know how to say his name, I'm sorry. He was Brian's colleague at the pizzeria, and he actually died from an overdose of drugs and alcohol. But his death was ruled as an accident and not connected to the bombing. Although, in some sources, according to Floyd and Ken, Robert was in attendance when they strapped the bomb to Brian and was paid in drugs, the same drugs that would later kill him, to ensure that Brian would comply. So, one of the awful parts about this case, too, is they were looking for three black men and they had actually wrongfully arrested a black man whose girlfriend had known Brian. I believe they lived in the same apartment building. And so they arrested this black man. Thankfully, he was never charged, but still, that's still awful. So the police were still kind of looking around to see what was going on. And in September of 2003, William had actually written a suicide letter that was supposed to be for James Roden. So earlier I had mentioned that Marjorie had a boyfriend who died by suicide, but that wasn't actually true. So a lot of people believed he did die from suicide, and William actually kind of told everyone the truth. So William ended up making a call to 911 and reported that Marjorie had shot James in a fight over money and to silence his testimony about the bombing because she believed that James was going to tell everyone. So, Marjorie paid William $2,000 to place James' remains in a freezer in his garage. So, after William calls the police are able to arrest Marjorie and they charge her for James's death. So, the police and the agents questioned William about Brian's case because they still didn't have any information on this. And he claimed that he was the one to make the phone call to the pizzeria. But he kind of was like, I might have been the one to do it. He didn't really admit to it. So the police were continually trying to find out what happened to Brian. So in mid March of 2004, Marjorie had actually been transferred from the prison to a psychiatric hospital for long term psychiatric eval because of her bipolar. So they wanted to make sure she was fit for trial. So at this point, she's only charged for James's murder, but she wasn't allowed to be interviewed or interrogated for Brian at that time until she was clear. So the FBI would go on to say this case was very confusing and bizarre at the time. It just had so many bizarre crimes in it. And actually, William ended up dying in 2004 from cancer, and he was even questioned on his deathbed, but he wouldn't tell them anything. He just kind of was like, "Nope, that's my secret." So, in 2005, Marjorie was cleared. Her mental health was okay, and she was able to stand trial. She pled guilty to the murder of James, and eventually, later on, she was able and questioned on Brian. She wouldn't tell them anything, but she eventually did. So, apparently, she wanted to kill James because James was going to come out about Brian. And she said the reason that she never told anyone about Brian was because it would have kind of put her on the spot for where James went. So she knew that she couldn't admit to it. And apparently, she said she gave William kitchen timers and all of the components to make this bomb. And I believe like her and Ken were watching Brian when he was held at with the police with binoculars. They were watching the whole thing, which is just so crazy. So at first, Marjorie was first raised with immunity during the interviews. So what's interesting is she wouldn't stop yapping and never got the deal. She just kept telling them everything. And she would later try to dispute this, saying this never happened. But they had so many other witnesses. They had Floyd and they also had Ken. And so when they questioned Floyd, he actually told them about how William and Marjorie were very involved in the bank robbery because they wanted money. And then they ended up interviewing Ken because he apparently was friends with Brian. And he actually said that Marjorie was the one to hire him to go and kill her father. And they also were a part of this entire thing. So in the end, it took a really long time, but Marjorie and Ken were both charged in 2007. So this took a while. And in 2011, Marjorie was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Ken was actually given 22 years and a half in exchange to testify against Marjorie. They actually both ended up dying in prison. Floyd was actually granted immunity in exchange to testify against Marjorie, although I didn't do my full research into if he was charged for the rape of that disabled teenager. Brian's family to this day, they believe that Brian was not aware of this and was forced into this. And it's kind of hard to know exactly what happened. Again, a lot of people suspect that Brian might have had a learning disability or some kind of cognitive delays that maybe made him more trusting, but we honestly will never know exactly why he did this. There's so many different reasons, but yeah, that's kind of what we have for this case. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you guys in our next one.